A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Ancient Scars. The scream that tore through the castle walls 13 years ago still echoed in King Lysander Ravencourt's dreams. Even now, at 29, he could smell the acrid smoke and hear the inhuman shrieks that had announced the destruction of everything he'd ever loved. He stood on the battlements of Astoreth Castle, his golden eyes surveying the kingdom he'd rebuilt from ash and blood. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across his angular face, highlighting the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of that terrible night when creatures from the Shadow Realm had swept down upon his family's stronghold. Lysander had been 16 then, barely old enough to shift properly, when the attack came. His father, King Aldwin, had been a ruler who believed in mercy, in extending aid to neighboring kingdoms, in showing the softer side of strength. That compassion had made them vulnerable. The shadow creatures had struck during the harvest festival, when the castle's defenses were focused on celebration rather than war. Lysander could still remember his mother's terrified face as she pushed him toward the hidden passages, her last words burning in his memory. "Run, my son. Live to reclaim what they've stolen." He hadn't run far enough. The creatures had found him cowering in the crypts, and it was only his uncle Mordecai's arrival with a handful of surviving guards that had saved his life. Mordecai had fought the beasts with a ferocity that bordered on supernatural, wielding strange incantations that sent the shadow creatures writhing back to whatever hell had spawned them. In the aftermath, as they stood among the smoking ruins of what had once been a thriving court, Mordecai had made him a promise. Never again will our bloodline show such weakness. Never again will mercy be mistaken for strength. The lessons that followed had been brutal. Combat training until his hands bled. Diplomatic negotiations where any sign of softness was met with punishment. Strategic planning that prioritized victory over honor. Lysander had learned to bury the gentle boy his parents had raised, replacing him with a king whose reputation for ruthlessness kept enemies at bay. Yet for all his strength, for all the fear he commanded across the 7 kingdoms, he remained incomplete. 13 years of rule, and still no mate had been found. No Luna stood beside his throne. The Council of Lords grew restless, their whispered concerns about succession growing louder with each passing season. "Your Majesty?" The voice belonged to Captain Gareth, his closest friend since childhood, and the only person who remembered the boy Lysander had been before the massacre. "High Counselor Mordecai requests an audience. He says it's urgent." Lysander nodded, his jaw tightening. Mordecai's urgent matters rarely brought good news. As they walked through the castle's stone corridors, Gareth fell into step beside him, their friendship one of the few constants in Lysander's harsh world. "The Northern patrols return tonight," Gareth mentioned, his tone casual but weighted with meaning. "I'll be departing for the annual border inspection in 3 weeks' time, as always. The frontier remains stable? For now, though there have been strange reports from the mountain villages. Livestock found drained of blood, strange lights in the forest. The people are growing fearful." Before Lysander could respond, they reached the council chamber where Mordecai waited. His uncle had aged well in the 13 years since that terrible night. His hair now silver white, his thin frame draped in the dark robes that marked his position as High Counselor. But his pale eyes remained as sharp as ever, and Lysander had learned to be wary when they held their current gleam of anticipation. "Nephew," Mordecai said, rising from his chair with a slight bow, "I have news that will change everything." Lysander took his seat at the head of the table, gesturing for his uncle to continue. Mordecai produced an ancient scroll, its parchment yellow with age, its edges blackened as if it had survived fire. "I have spent years researching the prophecies of the Old Kingdom, seeking answers to why our family was targeted, why the shadow creatures chose us above all others." Mordecai's voice carried the weight of revelation. "And I have found our salvation." He unrolled the scroll, revealing symbols written in the old tongue, the script that predated the common language by centuries. Lysander could make out some of the words, but Mordecai's translation filled in the gaps. "The prophecy of the crimson moon," Mordecai intoned. "It speaks of a time when darkness will return to consume the realm, when the shadow creatures will rise again to finish what they began. But it also speaks of a sacrifice that can prevent this catastrophe." Lysander's blood chilled. What kind of sacrifice? The king without a mate must offer the daughter of the Red Moon to the ancient powers. Only her blood, freely given, can seal the breach between our world and the Shadow Realm forever. Mordecai's eyes burned with fervor. We have lived in fear for 13 years. But this prophecy offers us the chance to end the threat once and for all. And this daughter of the Red Moon? She bears a mark. A crescent-shaped birthmark that glows silver under moonlight. She will be found in the 22nd year of her life, during the season when the moon bleeds red. Mordecai smiled, but there was nothing warm in the expression. The blood moon rises in 6 weeks, nephew. We must find her before then. Lysander stared at the prophecy, his mind reeling. Another sacrifice, another death laid at his feet. Yet if it meant protecting his kingdom from the horrors that had destroyed his family, could he refuse? Begin the search immediately, he commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Send riders to every village, every settlement. If this woman exists, I will find her. Miles away, in a cottage at the edge of the Whisperwood forest, Evangeline Moonshadow jerked awake from another nightmare. The dreams came every night now, growing more vivid and more terrifying. Always the same vision. A man with golden eyes and a scarred face, standing over her with a blade raised high, the scent of pine and steel, the weight of ancient stone beneath her back. And always, the sensation of heat building in her palms until she thought her skin might burn. She pressed trembling fingers to her throat, feeling for the leather cord that should have been there, but grandmother's protective amulet was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos of the old woman's final illness. Without it, Evangeline felt exposed, vulnerable in ways she couldn't name. The truth was that the amulet and the herbs had always worked together. One masked her scent to ordinary wolves. The other veiled her from darker things that prowled between worlds. Without both, she was dangerously exposed. "Child, are you awake?" Her grandmother's voice was barely a whisper from the next room. Evangeline rose quickly, padding across the cold wooden floor to where the old woman lay surrounded by flickering candles. Eleanor Moonshadow had been failing for weeks, her once bright eyes growing dim, her breathing shallow and labored. "The dreams again?" Eleanor asked, though her granddaughter hadn't spoken. "The same man, the same golden eyes." "Grandmother, what do they mean?" Eleanor's weathered hand reached out, grasping Evangeline's with surprising strength. "Listen to me carefully, child. There are things I should have told you years ago. Truths I hoped you would never need to know. What truths? The herbs I taught you to brew. The ones that mask your scent, hide your true nature. They are more than simple remedies. You are not what you appear to be, Evangeline. You are not merely a village healer's granddaughter." Fear clawed at Evangeline's throat. "I don't understand." "The prophecy that seeks you. The darkness that hunts our bloodline. It has found us at last." Eleanor's grip tightened. "You are the daughter of the Red Moon, child. You have entered your 22nd year, child. The very age the prophecy foretold. That is why the dreams have grown stronger, why the shadows have found us at last, the one they will come for when the crimson light rises." Before Evangeline could respond, before she could ask the 100 questions burning in her mind, Eleanor's eyes widened with her final breath. "You are the key to something far greater and far more dangerous than they know. Guard the diary. Trust no one. And remember, the prophecy they seek is not the only one that exists." The old woman's hand went limp, and Evangeline was left alone with a corpse, a mystery, and the terrible certainty that her peaceful life was over. Chapter 2. The Hunt Begins. Evangeline had barely finished wrapping her grandmother's body in the old burial shroud when the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the forest. Multiple horses, moving fast, their riders pushing hard through the undergrowth. She pressed herself against the cottage window, peering through the gap in the wooden shutters as a patrol of royal guards emerged from the tree line. The leader wore the crimson and gold of the king's personal guard, his weathered face scarred from countless battles. Behind him rode 6 men, their armor gleaming despite the morning's travel, their eyes sharp as they scanned the humble dwelling. "This is the place," the leader announced, dismounting with predatory grace. "The scent trail ends here." Scent trail. Evangeline's blood turned to ice. Without her grandmother's protective herbs, without the amulet that had masked her true nature since childhood, she was completely exposed. Whatever they were hunting, they had found her. She grabbed the leather-bound diary her grandmother had pressed into her hands during those final moments, shoving it into the folds of her worn cloak. The ancient book felt warm against her ribs, as if it held secrets that pulsed with their own life. The cottage door splintered under the weight of an armored fist. Evangeline turned to face her captors, her chin lifted in defiance even as fear coursed through her veins. The lead guard stepped across the threshold, his nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "There," he breathed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Captain Marcus, to His Majesty, we have found her." "Found who?" Evangeline demanded, though she suspected the answer would seal her fate. "The one who bears the mark of prophecy." His eyes dropped to her left shoulder, where the crescent-shaped birthmark had always been hidden beneath fabric. "Show us the sign, girl, and this will go easier for you." Evangeline backed toward the fireplace, her hand closing around the iron poker. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a healer's apprentice. My grandmother just died, and I need to prepare her for burial." The guard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The shadow creatures were not always the same. Sometimes mindless beasts, other times cunning hunters that moved with eerie coordination. It was as if an unseen hand decided when they would be feral and when they would be disciplined, each attack revealing a different face of the same darkness. Eleanor Moonshadow was more than a simple healer, and you know it. She was the last keeper of the old knowledge, the guardian of bloodlines that stretch back to the First Kingdoms. And you, girl, are her greatest secret. 2 more guards flanked her, moving with the coordinated precision of wolves surrounding prey. Evangeline swung the poker in a wide arc, catching one across the temple and sending him stumbling backward. The iron sang through the air, and for a moment, she felt power course through her arms, strength she'd never possessed before. "She fights well for a village girl," one of them observed, drawing his sword. "Perhaps there's more wolf in her than she knows." The words struck her strangely. Wolf? But she'd never been able to shift, had never felt the animal spirit that supposedly dwelt within all their kind. Her grandmother had always said it was a blessing in disguise, that some gifts came with prices too high to pay. Captain Marcus raised his hand, stopping his men's advance. "Enough. We take her alive and unharmed, by direct order of His Majesty. Use the sleeping powder if you must, but she arrives at court intact." The mention of sleeping powder sent panic racing through Evangeline's system. She lunged toward the cottage's back window, but strong hands caught her waist, lifting her off her feet. The scent that filled her nostrils was overwhelming. Pine and steel, and something wild that made her wolf stir for the first time in her life. "Let me go!" she screamed, clawing at the arms that held her. "I have done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong, perhaps," Marcus replied, producing a small leather pouch from his belt. "But you are something that was prophesied long before you drew breath. Something our kingdom needs." The powder hit her face in a cloud of bitter herbs, and Evangeline felt consciousness slipping away even as she struggled. Her last clear thought was of the diary hidden in her cloak and her grandmother's dying words. The prophecy they seek is not the only one that exists. When she awoke, she was draped across the back of a horse, her hands bound, her head pounding from whatever drug they'd used. The forest was giving way to cultivated farmland, and in the distance, she could see the towers of Astereth Castle rising against the sky, black stone and sharp angles that spoke of power and purpose. The journey passed in a blur of motion and mounting dread. Other travelers on the road gave the royal patrol a wide berth, their eyes lingering on Evangeline with mixtures of curiosity and pity. Word would spread quickly through the countryside that the king's guards had captured someone, though they would never guess the true significance of their prize. As the castle walls grew larger, Evangeline caught glimpses of the kingdom her captor ruled. Astereth was prosperous but guarded, its people well-fed but wary, their eyes holding the wariness of those who had survived great tragedy. This was a realm built on strength and fear, she realized, a place where mercy had been burned away by necessity. The castle gates loomed overhead as they passed beneath the iron portcullis, and Evangeline felt the weight of ancient stone pressing down upon her. The courtyard beyond was vast and intimidating, filled with training soldiers and busy servants, all of whom stopped their work to stare as the patrol rode through. "Welcome to your new home," Marcus said quietly as he helped her down from the horse. His grip was firm but not cruel, the hold of a man following orders rather than personal malice. "A word of advice, girl. His Majesty is not known for his patience, and he has waited long for someone like you. Answer his questions honestly, and you may find your stay here less unpleasant than you fear." Less unpleasant than she feared. The words did little to comfort her as guards flanked her on either side, leading her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced kings and queens, their painted eyes following her progress with silent judgment. They paused outside a pair of massive oak doors, carved with the royal crest, a wolf's head surrounded by thorns. Beyond those doors waited the man from her dreams, the golden-eyed king who had haunted her sleep for months, the man who, according to prophecy, was meant to sacrifice her to save his kingdom. "His Majesty will see you now," the guard announced, and the door swung open to reveal the throne room beyond. King Lysander Ravencourt sat upon a throne of black wood and silver, his powerful frame draped in dark clothing that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his build. But it was his eyes that captured her. Golden orbs that seemed to burn with inner fire, eyes that widened slightly when they met hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with an energy Evangeline couldn't name, a pull that seemed to draw her forward despite every instinct screaming at her to run. This close, she could smell his scent, the same combination of pine and steel that had filled her nightmares, but now it seemed less threatening and more intoxicating. "Your Majesty," Marcus reported, his voice breaking the spell. "We found her exactly where the trail led us." The cottage reeked of concealment herbs, but without the old woman to maintain them, her true scent was unmistakable. Lysander rose from his throne, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Each step brought him closer, and Evangeline found herself unable to look away from his scarred face, from the golden eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a man accustomed to instant obedience. "Your Majesty." Marcus hesitated. Perhaps it would be wiser to keep guards present. "We know nothing of her capabilities." "I can handle one village girl," Lysander replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain of that fact. "Go." The throne room emptied, leaving them alone in the vast space. Evangeline stood straight despite her bound hands, her green eyes meeting his golden ones with a defiance that clearly surprised him. "You're not what I expected," he said finally, his voice softer than she'd imagined it would be. "What did you expect?" she challenged. "A cowering child ready to die for your convenience?" Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "I expected someone who understood the gravity of prophecy. Someone who knew that individual desires matter less than the survival of kingdoms. And I expected the king who ordered my capture to look less like a man and more like a monster," she shot back. "Yet here we are, both disappointed." The silence that followed was charged with tension, but not the kind she had anticipated. This wasn't the cold calculation of a ruler examining a sacrifice. This was something far more dangerous. The electric awareness of two souls recognizing something in each other that defied logic. "Show me the mark," Lysander said finally, his voice rough with emotions he was clearly struggling to control. "And if I refuse, then I will have my guards do it for you, and neither of us will enjoy that process." Evangeline studied his face, searching for deception or cruelty, but finding only a man trapped by circumstance and duty. Slowly, she pulled the neckline of her dress aside, revealing the crescent-shaped birthmark that had been her secret shame since childhood. The mark seemed to shimmer in the throne room's candlelight, and Lysander drew in a sharp breath. "It's true," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "The prophecy is real." "Which prophecy?" Evangeline asked, remembering her grandmother's final words. "The one that demands my death? Or the one that offers another path entirely?" Lysander's golden eyes snapped to hers, and for the first time since she'd entered this room, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "What other path?" But before she could answer, The doors burst open, and High Counselor Mordecai swept into the room, his pale eyes bright with anticipation and something that might have been hunger. "So," he said, his voice carrying satisfaction and dark purpose, "the daughter of the Red Moon has finally come home." Chapter 3. Unexpected Sanctuary. 3 weeks had passed since Evangeline's arrival at Astereth Castle, and she was beginning to understand that her imprisonment was unlike any she had imagined. The chambers they'd given her were spacious and well-appointed, with tall windows that overlooked the castle gardens and tapestries that depicted scenes of ancient battles. A far cry from the dungeon cell she had expected, yet a cage remained a cage, no matter how gilded its bars might be. She stood at the window now, watching the morning training exercises in the courtyard below. King Lysander moved among his soldiers with lethal grace, demonstrating combat techniques that spoke of hard-won experience. Even from this distance, she could feel the pull of his presence, the inexplicable attraction that had only grown stronger during their daily conversations. Because that's what they had become. Conversations rather than interrogations. Each evening, he would arrive at her chambers with food and questions. But somehow they always ended up discussing philosophy, history, or the dreams that plagued them both. He never mentioned the prophecy during these visits, never spoke of sacrifice or blood moons. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about her thoughts, her knowledge of healing herbs, her memories of life in the forest. He knew the council would bristle at how quickly she had become part of his world, their suspicions sharpened by years of political caution. Yet the restless whispers about succession had made them desperate. Even reluctant lords would cling to the hope that their king had finally found a mate. It was disarming and dangerous, in ways she hadn't anticipated. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting to see one of the servants who brought her meals. Instead, King Lysander stepped into the room, his golden eyes finding hers immediately. The formal crown and robes of state were absent today, replaced by simple dark clothing that emphasized the powerful lines of his body. The scar across his face seemed less harsh in the afternoon light, giving him an almost vulnerable appearance that made her heart clench unexpectedly. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a small curtsy. "This is earlier than usual." "I wanted to speak with you about something," he replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. His scent surrounded her, pine and steel, and something uniquely him that made her wolf stir restlessly. "You mentioned dreams before. Tell me about them." Evangeline hesitated. The dreams that had begun in her cottage had evolved since her arrival at the castle, becoming more vivid and more disturbing. But they were also becoming more prophetic, showing her glimpses of events before they occurred. Yesterday, she had dreamed of a patrol being attacked by shadow creatures near the eastern border. This morning, word had arrived that the patrol was missing. "They're not just dreams," she said finally. "They're visions. Warnings of things to come." Lysander turned to face her fully, his expression intense. "What have you seen?" "The attack on the eastern patrol. The shadow creatures gathering in greater numbers. A breach in the barrier between worlds that grows larger each day." She met his gaze steadily. "And you. Always you. Standing at the center of it all with blood on your hands." His jaw tightened. "My blood or someone else's? I don't know. The visions never show me everything, just fragments. But I can feel the weight of choice pressing down on you. The burden of decisions that will determine whether kingdoms live or die." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of prophecy and possibility hanging between them. Finally, Lysander spoke again, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Tell me about your grandmother. About the life you had before all this." The change of subject caught her off guard, but she found herself answering anyway. "She was everything to me after my parents died. Teacher, protector, the only family I had left. She taught me to read the old languages, to brew healing potions, to listen to the whispers of the forest. But she also taught me to hide what I was, to mask my scent, and keep my true nature secret. Why? Because she knew this day would come. She knew that eventually, someone would come looking for the daughter of the Red Moon, and she wanted to give me as normal a life as possible before that happened." Evangeline's voice caught slightly. "She died protecting me, and I don't even know what she was protecting me from." Lysander's hand moved as if he wanted to touch her. but he caught himself and stepped back instead. Perhaps she was protecting you from me. Were you planning to hurt me? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lysander's golden eyes searched her face, and she saw the war raging behind them. Duty against desire. Prophecy against something deeper and more dangerous. I don't know, he admitted finally. When my uncle first brought me the prophecy, when he told me that sacrificing you could save the kingdom from another attack like the one that destroyed my family, it seemed clear. One life to save thousands. But now I look at you, and I see someone who dreams of dangers before they arrive. Someone who could help protect this kingdom, rather than simply die for it. And I wonder if the prophecy means something different than what we've been told. Before Evangeline could respond, another vision struck her with brutal suddenness. She gasped, her hands flying to her temples as images flooded her mind. Shadow creatures massing in the northern forests, a breach in the ancient barriers, and approaching the castle gates, a patrol returning with news that would change everything. They're coming, she whispered, her voice strained with the effort of processing what she had seen. Captain Gareth returns within the hour, and he brings word of disaster. The northern settlements have been attacked. The shadow creatures are moving south. Lysander stared at her for a moment, then moved swiftly to the window. In the distance, barely visible against the forest line, a small group of riders approached the castle gates. Even from this distance, she could see that they rode hard, their horses lathered with sweat and exhaustion. How could you possibly know that? He demanded. The same way I knew about the Eastern Patrol. The same way I know that this is only the beginning. Evangeline moved to stand beside him, her green eyes reflecting the urgency of her visions. The shadow creatures aren't random attackers, Your Majesty. They're scouts, testing your defenses, learning your weaknesses. Something is driving them forward. Something that wants very badly to see this kingdom fall. The sound of horns echoed across the courtyard, announcing the return of the patrol. Lysander's jaw clenched as he recognized the signal. 3 short blasts that meant urgent news, possible disaster. I have to go, he said, but he paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Evangeline, I want you to know that whatever happens next, whatever the prophecy demands, I will not let harm come to you if there's another way. And if there isn't another way? The question followed him from the room, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Evangeline sank into the chair beside her window, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had seen. The visions were growing stronger, more detailed, and with them came a growing certainty that her fate and the king's were bound together in ways that went far beyond ancient prophecies. That evening, he returned to her chambers as always, but this time his face was grim with confirmation of her predictions. Captain Gareth had indeed brought news of disaster. 3 northern settlements destroyed, their populations slaughtered or taken. The shadow creatures were no longer content to lurk at the edges of the kingdom. They were advancing with purpose and intelligence. How did you know? He asked without preamble, as he settled into the chair across from her. The vision came to you hours before Gareth arrived. That's not possible unless I'm exactly what the prophecy claims I am, Evangeline finished. The daughter of the Red Moon, born with the sight that pierces veils between worlds. The question is, what does that really mean? Lysander leaned forward, his golden eyes intense in the candlelight. My uncle believes it means you must die to seal the breach between our world and the Shadow Realm. But you spoke of another prophecy, another path. What did your grandmother tell you? Evangeline hesitated, then reached into the folds of her dress to withdraw the leather-bound diary Eleanor had pressed into her hands. She said there were things about our bloodline that even she didn't fully understand. This book belonged to my great-grandmother, and before her, to the first woman who bore the crescent mark. But many of the pages have been torn out, and what remains is written in a dialect so old that even I can barely read it. She handed him the book, watching as he examined the ancient leather binding and the faded symbols etched into its cover. When he opened it, she saw his eyes widen slightly at the archaic script within. This is older than the prophecy scroll my uncle showed me, he said softly. Much older. These symbols predate the common tongue by centuries. Can you read any of it? Fragments. References to bloodlines and ancient pacts. Mentions of power that flows through certain family trees. But there's something else here. Something about union rather than sacrifice. He looked up at her, his expression troubled. If this book contains the true prophecy, then everything we've been told may be wrong. Or it may be incomplete, Evangeline suggested. Perhaps both prophecies are true, depending on the choices we make. The candles flickered in their holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls around them. Outside, night had fallen completely, and with it came the sense of time running short. The blood moon was rising in 3 weeks, and whatever path they chose, it would have to be decided before then. There's something else, Lysander said suddenly. Something I need to tell you about the night my family died. Evangeline set down her teacup and gave him her full attention, sensing that whatever he was about to reveal would change everything between them. The shadow creatures didn't attack randomly. They came looking for something specific, someone specific. My uncle told me later that they had been searching for a bloodline that had gone into hiding, a family that carried secrets from the old kingdom. They destroyed my family because they thought we were harboring that bloodline. The words hit her like a physical blow. They were looking for someone like me. Yes. And by bringing you here, by following the prophecy as my uncle interprets it, I may be giving them exactly what they've always wanted. His golden eyes met hers, filled with a pain that went deeper than physical scars. The question is, are you the key to their victory, or the weapon that will finally destroy them? Before she could answer, the castle bells began to toll. Not the measured chimes of the hour, but the urgent clanging that meant immediate danger. Lysander was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the sword at his side. What does that mean? Evangeline asked, though the ice in her veins suggested she already knew. It means the shadow creatures have found us, he replied grimly. And this time, they're not just scouting. Chapter 4. Hearts in Peril. The shadow creature's attack had been repelled, but barely. Evangeline stood at her window in the gray dawn light, watching as servants carried bodies from the courtyard, while others worked to repair the damaged gates. 3 men had died during the night, and twice that number bore wounds that would take weeks to heal. Yet somehow, her visions had helped minimize the casualties. When she had told Lysander exactly where the creatures would strike first, exactly how they would attempt to breach the walls, he had listened without question. The defense had been swift and coordinated, and the shadow creatures had been driven back before they could establish a foothold within the castle grounds. But they would return. She could feel it in the air, see it in the worried expressions of the guards, taste it in the tension that now permeated the castle like smoke. A soft knock interrupted her brooding thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting to see a servant with her morning meal. Instead, Captain Gareth stepped into her chambers, his weathered face showing the strain of the night's battle. Blood stained his armor, and exhaustion lined his features. But his eyes held a respect that hadn't been there before. "My lady," he said, offering a slight bow. "His Majesty requests your presence in the garden. He said to tell you that he has something important to discuss." Evangeline nodded, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders. "Captain, may I ask you something?" "Of course, my lady. Do you believe in prophecies?" Gareth was quiet for a moment, his battle-scarred hands adjusting his sword belt. "I believe in what I can see and touch," he said finally. "Last night you told us exactly where those creatures would attack, exactly how they would try to breach our defenses. Because of your warning, my men were ready. Because of your guidance, 3 families still have their fathers coming home." He met her eyes directly. "Whether you're prophesied or not, you saved lives last night. That's worth believing in." The castle gardens were a stark contrast to the violence of the previous evening. Ancient oak trees provided shade over carefully tended flower beds, and stone benches were positioned to catch the morning sunlight. It was here that Evangeline found Lysander, standing beside a fountain carved with images of wolves and roses. He turned as she approached, and she saw that he too bore the marks of the night's fighting. A fresh bandage covered his left forearm, and exhaustion etched lines around his golden eyes. Yet when he looked at her, something else flickered in those depths, something that made her heart race despite the circumstances. "You look tired," she observed, settling onto the bench beside the fountain. As do you. Did you sleep at all after the attack? Sleep seems less important than the visions now. They come whether I'm awake or not, and they're growing stronger. She studied his profile as he gazed across the garden. Your wound. Let me see it. It's nothing serious. The castle healer tended to it already. Please. Without waiting for his permission, she reached for his arm, gently unwrapping the linen bandage. The cut beneath was deep but clean, clearly inflicted by a shadow creature's claw. As she examined the wound, her fingertips began to warm with an energy she was only beginning to understand. Evangeline, Lysander said quietly, but he didn't pull away as golden light began to emanate from her hands. The healing energy flowed through her palms and into his wounded flesh, knitting torn skin back together and soothing inflamed tissue. She could feel the connection between them strengthening as she worked, could sense his wonder and something deeper, a pull that went beyond gratitude or simple attraction. When she finished, the wound had closed completely, leaving only a thin silver line that would fade within days. But the energy that had passed between them lingered, creating an awareness that made the very air seem charged with possibility. How? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know. It's always been there, dormant until recently. My grandmother taught me basic herb lore, but this is something else entirely. She looked down at her hands, still glowing faintly with residual power. Another gift of the bloodline, perhaps. Another reason why the shadow creatures want me. Or another reason why we need you alive, Lysander said, his fingers brushing over the newly healed skin. Evangeline, there's something I need to tell you. About last night. About what I felt when I saw you standing in that window, directing our defense as if you'd been born to it. She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering against her ribs at the intensity in his golden eyes. I've been fighting against it since the moment you arrived, he continued, telling myself it was nothing more than the novelty of having someone challenge me, someone who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. But last night, when I saw you using your gifts to protect my people, to protect what matters to me, he paused, his jaw clenching with internal struggle. I realized what I've been trying to deny. What? The word came out barely above a whisper. You're my mate. The bond thrummed between them. Powerful, but incomplete. Wolves recognized the truth of it, yet both knew the old rites had not been fulfilled. Until the claiming ceremony was performed under the moon's gaze, their union would remain only half-formed, a promise waiting to be sealed. The admission hung between them like a confession and a revelation all at once. I can feel it in my wolf, in the way my very soul responds to your presence. The bond has been forming since the day you arrived, and I've been too stubborn or too afraid to acknowledge it. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. Everything suddenly made sense. The inexplicable attraction, the way his scent seemed to calm her wolf, the pull she felt toward him despite every rational reason to fear him. I can feel it too, she whispered. I thought it was just the circumstances, the danger and the isolation making me imagine things that weren't there. But when I heal you, when our hands touch, it's like completing a circuit that's been broken my whole life. Lysander reached for her then, his large hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. Which makes this so much harder. The prophecy, she said, understanding immediately. My uncle expects me to sacrifice you in 2 weeks when the blood moon rises. He believes it's the only way to seal the breach between worlds, to protect the kingdom from another massacre like the one that killed my family. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones, his touch reverent and desperate at the same time. But how can I kill the woman who was made for me? How can I destroy the one person who makes me feel whole? Before she could answer, footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind them. They sprang apart as High Counselor Mordecai emerged from behind a stand of roses, his pale eyes bright with interest, and something that might have been satisfaction. Your Majesty, he said, offering a bow that somehow managed to seem mocking. I was looking for you to discuss the preparations for the ritual. I see you're spending time with our honored guest. We were discussing her visions, Lysander replied, his voice carefully neutral, though Evangeline could feel the tension radiating from him. Her insights proved invaluable during last night's attack. Indeed. Most fortunate that she was able to provide such precise intelligence about our enemy's plans. Mordecai's gaze fixed on Evangeline with uncomfortable intensity. One might wonder how she came by such specific knowledge. What are you implying? Lysander's voice carried a warning edge. Nothing untoward, I assure you. Merely observing that prophecy works in mysterious ways. Perhaps her connection to the shadow realm allows her to perceive their intentions. He smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. All the more reason to proceed with the ritual as planned. The blood moon rises in 12 days, nephew. We must be ready. And if there's another way? Evangeline interjected, earning sharp looks from both men. What if the prophecy doesn't require death but something else entirely? Mordecai's laugh was cold as winter wind. Child, I have studied the ancient texts for decades. The meaning is clear. Only the willing sacrifice of the daughter of the Red Moon can seal the breach and save the kingdom. To interpret it otherwise would be wishful thinking at best, willful blindness at worst. Then perhaps you should study different texts, she replied, meeting his pale gaze directly. The book my grandmother left me tells a different story. Something flickered across Mordecai's features. Surprise, anger, perhaps even fear. But it was gone so quickly that Evangeline might have imagined it. Ancient books can be deceptive, particularly when translated by those without proper training, he said dismissively. I would be happy to examine this tome you mention, to provide proper scholarly interpretation of its contents. That won't be necessary, Lysander interjected smoothly. I am perfectly capable of reading the old scripts. Of course, Your Majesty. But surely a second opinion would be valuable, particularly when dealing with texts that might offer false hope. Mordecai's smile turned predatory. After all, we wouldn't want to make decisions based on misguided sentiment rather than cold fact. The insult was subtle but unmistakable, and Evangeline felt Lysander's anger spike through their growing bond. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, feeling his wolf respond to her touch by settling slightly. Thank you for your concern, Uncle, Lysander said, his tone carefully controlled. But I think we can manage without additional interpretation for now. Perhaps you should focus on preparing the ritual components, in case they prove necessary. It was a dismissal. Politely phrased, but absolute. Mordecai's eyes narrowed slightly, but he bowed again and departed, leaving them alone in the garden once more. He doesn't trust me, Evangeline observed once the High Counselor was out of earshot. He doesn't trust anyone who might interfere with his plans, Lysander replied grimly. My uncle has spent 13 years building his vision of what this kingdom should be, and he won't allow sentiment or alternative interpretations to stand in his way, even if those alternatives might save more lives. Especially then. Mordecai believes that strength comes only through sacrifice, that mercy is weakness, and that the good of the many always outweighs the life of the individual. He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes burning with intensity. But I'm beginning to think he's wrong about a great many things. That evening found them in Lysander's private study, poring over both the ancient diary and the prophecy scroll by candlelight. The contrast between the two texts was striking. Where the scroll spoke of sacrifice and death, the diary hinted at union and shared power. Where the scroll demanded blood, the diary suggested that love might be the stronger magic. Here, Evangeline said, pointing to a passage written in archaic script. This section speaks of two souls joined as one, of power flowing between bonded hearts. It says that the daughter of the Red Moon will find her strength not in death, but in the arms of the one who claims her. Lysander leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he studied the text. And this part mentions sealing the breach through unity rather than sacrifice. If the translation is correct, it suggests that the mate bond itself might be the key to closing the rift between worlds. Two interpretations of the same basic prophecy, Evangeline mused. One demands death, the other offers life. The question is, which one is true? Perhaps they both are, Lysander said quietly. Perhaps the choice between them is what makes all the difference. Their eyes met across the ancient pages, and the air between them crackled with possibility and desire. The mate bond pulled at them both, growing stronger with each shared glance, each accidental touch. Evangeline could feel her wolf rising to the surface, recognizing her true mate and demanding acknowledgement of what lay between them. Lysander, she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He reached for her then, his hands tangling in her auburn hair as he drew her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the space between heartbeats. But the second was fire and hunger and desperate need, years of loneliness and searching finally finding their end in each other's arms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their wolves recognizing the rightness of the connection, even as their human minds reeled with the implications. "Whatever happens," Lysander said, his forehead resting against hers, "whatever the prophecy demands, know that I choose you. I choose us. Even if it costs your kingdom, even then. Because what good is a kingdom without someone to share it with? What good is power without love to make it worthwhile?" His hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the curve of her lips. "I won't sacrifice you, Evangeline. Whatever the cost. I won't be the one to destroy what fate has given me." Outside, the wind howled through the castle towers, and somewhere in the distance, shadow creatures called to each other across the darkened forest. The blood moon rose closer with each passing day, and difficult choices lay ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by ancient texts and flickering candlelight, two souls had found their match. Whatever trials awaited them, they would face them together. The prophecy might demand sacrifice, but love demanded something else entirely. And in the end, love might prove to be the stronger magic after all. Chapter 5. Dark Revelations. The nightmare came with vivid clarity, more real than any vision Evangeline had experienced before. She stood in a vast underground chamber carved from living stone, its walls covered with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight. Ancient books lined shelves that stretched into darkness, their leather bindings cracked with age and secrets. But it was the figure hunched over a stone table that filled her with dread. Mordecai stood surrounded by artifacts of dark power, his pale hands weaving patterns in the air above what looked like fragments of torn parchment. As she watched, the pieces began to knit themselves back together, revealing text that made her blood freeze in her veins. She woke, gasping, her heart racing as fragments of the dream lingered in her mind. Books, ancient texts hidden beneath the castle, and something about the original prophecy that Mordecai didn't want anyone to discover. The vision had been so clear, so specific, that she knew it was more than just a dream. Somewhere in this castle, hidden away from prying eyes, lay the truth about her bloodline and the real meaning of the prophecy. Rising quietly from her bed, Evangeline wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and slipped from her chambers. The castle corridors were dimly lit by scattered torches, their shadows dancing on stone walls as she made her way toward the lower levels. Her wolf guided her steps, following scents and sounds that her human senses could barely perceive. The entrance to the hidden chamber was exactly where her vision had shown it, behind a tapestry depicting the conquest of the Shadow Realm. Accessible through a narrow stone passage that descended into the bowels of the castle, the air grew colder as she descended, heavy with the weight of centuries and the musty scent of ancient knowledge. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and scrolls that predated the common tongue, their titles written in scripts she recognized from her grandmother's teachings. This was a repository of the old knowledge, the collected wisdom of bloodlines that stretched back to the First Kingdoms. But it was the table at the center of the room that drew her attention. Scattered across its surface were fragments of parchment, pieces of what had once been a complete document. With trembling fingers, she began to arrange them, watching as the ancient script revealed its secrets. What she read there made her legs weak with shock. The true prophecy was nothing like what Mordecai had shown the king. Where his version spoke of sacrifice and death, the complete text told a different story entirely. The daughter of the Red Moon was not meant to die, but to unite with her destined mate, their combined power sealing the breach between worlds through love rather than blood. But there was more. According to the original text, the shadow creatures weren't invaders from another realm. They were servants of someone within this world, someone who sought to use the confusion and fear they generated to seize power for himself. Someone who had deliberately altered the prophecy to serve his own ends. "Fascinating reading, isn't it?" Evangeline spun around to find Mordecai standing in the chamber's entrance, his pale eyes bright with malevolent satisfaction. Behind him stood 6 guards whose faces she didn't recognize, men whose scents carried the taint of gold and corruption. "You," she breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "You've been controlling the shadow creatures." Mordecai had not created the shadow creatures. He had only harnessed them, bending their chaos for his own schemes. The true master that whispered in their darkness was far older, and Mordecai had been nothing more than a willing intermediary, a mortal hand serving an immortal will. "You orchestrated the attacks, the fear. All of it. Very good," Mordecai replied, stepping into the chamber with predatory grace, "though it took you long enough to piece it together. I was beginning to think the great prophetic bloodline had diluted beyond usefulness." "Why?" The word tore from her throat raw with betrayal and rage. "Your own family died in those attacks. Lysander's parents, his siblings, necessary sacrifices." Mordecai interrupted coldly. "My brother was weak, too compassionate to do what needed to be done. He would have led this kingdom to ruin with his mercy and his treaties. I saved Ashtoreth from that fate." Evangeline backed toward the table, her hand closing around one of the parchment fragments. "You murdered your own family for power. I saved my nephew from becoming another weak king who would watch enemies destroy everything our bloodline built." His voice carried the fervor of absolute conviction. "Under my guidance, Lysander became strong, ruthless, feared by our enemies. He built an empire that spans 7 kingdoms, because I taught him that mercy is weakness. And now you want to use the prophecy to cement your control," she said, understanding flooding through her. "If I die in a ritual sacrifice, if the shadow creature attacks mysteriously end afterward, you become the hero who saved the kingdom. Lysander would trust you completely." Mordecai smiled, and it was the coldest expression she had ever seen. "The boy has always been too sentimental. His feelings for you threaten everything I've worked to build. But once you're gone, once he sees that hard choices bring results, he'll remember the lessons I taught him. He'll never forgive you when he learns the truth." "What truth? The grieving king who lost his mate to save his people? The noble sacrifice that ended a supernatural threat?" Mordecai's laugh echoed off the stone walls. "There will be no evidence of anything else. These texts will burn tonight, along with anyone who might interpret them differently." The guards moved closer, their hands resting on sword hilts. Evangeline felt power building in her palms, the same golden energy that had healed Lysander's wounds, but stronger now, more focused. Her wolf surged to the surface, no longer dormant but awakening with protective fury. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's shadows dance. "Lysander will come looking for me." "Lysander is currently enjoying wine laced with sleeping herbs, courtesy of his devoted uncle who wanted to ensure he rested well before tomorrow's journey to the ritual site." Mordecai's eyes glittered with triumph. "By the time he wakes, you'll be dead, and the shadow creatures will have mysteriously vanished, their purpose served." Evangeline's heart clenched with desperate fear, not for herself, but for the man she loved. If Mordecai succeeded, Lysander would spend the rest of his life believing he had failed to protect her, never knowing that his own uncle was the architect of every tragedy that had shaped his life. "The ancient texts speak of power flowing between bonded mates," she said, stalling for time while energy continued to build within her. "Did you know that? Folklore and wishful thinking. Ideal in results, not romantic fantasies." "Then you don't know what happens when someone threatens a moonborn's true mate." The words came from somewhere deep inside her, knowledge that felt older than memory. "You don't know what kind of power love can unleash." Mordecai's expression flickered, uncertainty replacing confidence for just a moment. "Kill her," he ordered the guards. "Quickly, before—" The chamber exploded with golden light. Power erupted from Evangeline's body in waves, flowing outward from her skin to illuminate every corner of the hidden library. The guards staggered backward, their eyes wide with shock and sudden fear. Ancient books began to glow as if responding to her presence, their pages fluttering open to reveal secrets written in languages of light. But more importantly, She felt the bond between herself and Lysander blaze to life across the distance, cutting through whatever drug clouded his consciousness. She felt him jolt awake in his chambers, felt his roar of fury as he realized she was in danger. Impossible. Mordecai breathed, his face pale with shock. The bloodline record said nothing about this level of power. Maybe you should have read more carefully, Evangeline replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the very stones sing in response. Or maybe you should have considered that love is stronger than whatever darkness you've been playing with. She reached out through the mate bond, sending everything she had learned directly into Lysander's mind. The hidden chamber, the altered prophecy, the truth about who had orchestrated the attacks on his family. She felt his rage explode across their connection, felt his wolf tear free from human restraint as he raced toward her location. "Seize her now!" Mordecai shouted at his guards, but the men were backing away from the golden radiance that surrounded her. "She's just one woman!" "No," said a voice from the chamber entrance, cold as winter death, and filled with the absolute authority of an alpha king. "She's my mate." Lysander stood in the doorway, no longer entirely human. His eyes burned with golden fire, his form wavering between man and wolf as rage threatened to tear him apart. Behind him came Captain Gareth and a dozen of the castle's most loyal guards, their weapons drawn and their faces grim with purpose. "Hello, Uncle," Lysander continued, his voice carrying harmonics that made every guard in the chamber drop to their knees in submission. "We need to talk." Mordecai's composure cracked completely, revealing the desperate ambition beneath his cultured exterior. "Nephew, you don't understand. Everything I did was for the good of the kingdom, for the strength of our bloodline. She's filled your head with romantic nonsense, made you weak." "Weak?" Lysander stepped into the chamber, power rolling off him in waves that made the air itself crackle with electricity. "You think love makes me weak?" He moved faster than human eyes could follow, crossing the distance between them in a single bound. His hand closed around Mordecai's throat, lifting the older man off his feet with effortless strength. "You killed my family," he said, his voice barely recognizable as human. "You destroyed my childhood, my innocence, my ability to trust. You turned me into a weapon and pointed me at innocent people. And you want to tell me that love makes me weak?" Evangeline could feel the bond between them pulsing with shared rage and pain, could sense how close Lysander was to losing all control. "He's not worth it," she said softly, her hand finding his shoulder. "Don't let him turn you into something you're not." The touch of her skin against his seemed to anchor him, pulling him back from the edge of complete feral rage. Lysander's grip on Mordecai's throat loosened slightly, though his golden eyes never lost their deadly fire. "You're right," he said finally. "He's not worth becoming a monster." "Thank you," Mordecai gasped, relief flooding his features. "I knew you would see reason, nephew. We can work together, find another way." "I didn't say I was letting you live," Lysander interrupted. "I said you weren't worth becoming a monster over. There's a difference." Gareth stepped forward, iron shackles gleaming in his hands. "Your Majesty, perhaps a trial would be more appropriate. Let the kingdom see what he's done. Let them judge his crimes." Lysander considered this, his gaze never leaving his uncle's face. "A trial," he said finally. "Yes. Let everyone see exactly what kind of man sacrifices children for power. Let them see what real weakness looks like." As Gareth secured the shackles around Mordecai's wrists, Evangeline moved to the scattered parchments on the table. With careful hands, she began gathering the fragments of the true prophecy, the words that spoke of union rather than sacrifice, of love as the ultimate power. "The blood moon rises tomorrow night," she said quietly. "According to this, we still need to perform a ritual to seal the breach between worlds. But not the one your uncle planned." Lysander moved to stand beside her, his arm circling her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "What does it say? That two souls joined as one can heal what was broken, can close the door that should never have been opened." She looked up at him, her green eyes bright with possibility and promise. "It says that love is the strongest magic of all." Outside the hidden chamber, dawn was breaking over the kingdom of Astareth. The truth had been revealed, the real enemy exposed, and two destined souls had found their way to each other, despite every obstacle placed in their path. Tomorrow night, under the crimson light of the blood moon, they would complete what fate had begun, not through death and sacrifice, but through the willing union of hearts that chose each other above all else. The prophecy would be fulfilled at last, but not in the way anyone had expected. Love, as it turned out, was indeed the strongest magic of all. Chapter 6. Blood Moon Rising. The crimson moon hung heavy in the sky like a watchful eye, casting everything in shades of rust and shadow. Evangeline stood at the window of her chambers, her hands pressed against the cold stone as she watched the ancient altar being prepared on the mountainside. Soon, she and Lysander would climb those treacherous paths to fulfill a destiny that had been written in blood and starlight, centuries before either of them was born. But first, they had to survive what was coming. The shadow creatures had been gathering all day, drawn by the power of the blood moon and the promise of the ritual to come. From her vantage point, she could see them moving through the forest like living patches of darkness, their forms shifting and writhing as they awaited their master's final command, because Mordecai was no longer their master. During his interrogation in the castle dungeons, he had revealed the truth that chilled Evangeline to the bone. The shadow creatures had been serving him, yes, but only as an intermediary. Their true master was something far older and more powerful, an entity from the space between worlds that had been manipulating events for decades, and that entity was coming tonight, drawn by the blood moon and the gathering of power that the ritual represented. "You're afraid," Lysander said from behind her, his voice soft with understanding. She turned to face him, taking in the sight of the man who had become her anchor in the storm of prophecy and destiny. He wore simple dark clothing rather than royal regalia, his golden eyes reflecting the crimson light from the window. But it was the sword at his side that drew her attention, an ancient blade inscribed with runes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Terrified, she admitted, not of dying, but of failing, of letting that thing use the power of the ritual for its own purposes. Lysander crossed the room to her, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "We won't fail," he said with quiet conviction. "The true prophecy speaks of union, of two souls becoming one. Whatever comes tonight, we face it together." "Together," she agreed, leaning into his touch. The mate bond between them had grown stronger throughout the day, their souls intertwining in preparation for the ritual to come. She could feel his strength flowing through their connection, just as he could feel hers. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Captain Gareth entered, his weathered face grim with concern. "Your Majesty, the preparations are complete. The altar has been cleansed and blessed according to the old rites, and the circle of protection has been carved into the stone. But there's something else you need to know." "What is it?" Lysander asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected bad news. "The shadow creatures aren't just gathering. They're organized, moving in formation, taking strategic positions around the mountain. And there are more of them than we've ever seen before." Gareth's hand rested on his sword hilt. "Whatever's commanding them now, it's far more intelligent than Mordecai ever was." Evangeline felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. In her visions, she had glimpsed fragments of the true enemy, a being of pure darkness and malevolent intelligence, ancient beyond measure and hungry for the power that flowed through certain bloodlines. "How many men do we have?" Lysander asked. 50 of our best warriors, armed with blessed silver and protective charms. But sire, if what the prisoner told us about this entity is true, conventional weapons may not be enough. "Then we'll have to trust in unconventional ones," Lysander replied, his gaze moving to Evangeline. "The power of the moonborn bloodline, combined with the mate bond between us. The original prophecy suggests that together, we can accomplish what no single warrior could achieve alone." They made their way through the castle corridors, past portraits of long-dead kings and queens who had faced their own impossible choices. The weight of history pressed down upon them, the knowledge that the fate of not just one kingdom, but potentially the entire realm, rested upon what would happen in the next few hours. The journey up the mountain was treacherous, even under the best of circumstances. Tonight, with shadow creatures stalking through the darkness and the blood moon casting everything in crimson light, it felt like climbing into the mouth of hell itself. Evangeline rode beside Lysander, her senses hyper-aware of every shifting shadow, every whisper of movement in the forest around them. The warriors who accompanied them were the finest the kingdom had to offer, men who had sworn their lives to protect their king and his chosen mate. But she could smell their fear, could sense their uncertainty about facing an enemy that defied everything they understood about warfare. "There," she said suddenly, pointing toward a ridge ahead of them. "They're waiting for us." The shadow creatures had indeed taken position along the mountain path, their forms barely visible against the dark stone. But Evangeline's enhanced senses could see them clearly. Dozens of writhing, shapeless beings that existed somewhere between the physical and spiritual realms. "Hold formation," Lysander commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. "Blessed silver at the ready, but don't engage unless they attack first. We need to reach the altar." The climb continued in tense silence, punctuated only by the sound of hooves on stone and the whisper of wind through the mountain peaks. The shadow creatures followed their progress, but didn't attack, content to wait for whatever signal their master would give. As they crested the final ridge, the ancient altar came into view. Carved from a single massive stone and inscribed with symbols that predated written history, it stood at the center of a natural amphitheater, surrounded by towering peaks. The blood moon hung directly overhead, its crimson light making the carved runes glow like embers. But they weren't alone. Standing at the base of the altar was a figure that made Evangeline's blood freeze in her veins. Tall and elegant, draped in shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, with eyes that burned like stars in the darkness. "Welcome," the entity said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond the physical. "I have waited so long for this moment, for the daughter of the Red Moon to finally fulfill her true purpose." Lysander dismounted, his hand moving to the ancient sword at his side. "You're not welcome here, demon. This ritual belongs to us." The entity laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass and dying stars. "Foolish child, do you think this was ever about love? About some romantic notion of souls united? This ritual exists to open a permanent doorway between the realms, to allow my kind to flow into your world like a dark tide. The true prophecy speaks of sealing the breach, not widening it," Evangeline said, sliding down from her own mount to stand beside Lysander. "The true prophecy?" The entity's burning gaze fixed on her with predatory interest. "Child, I helped write that prophecy. I whispered the words into the minds of your ancestors, planted the seeds of a ritual that would serve my purposes. Your bloodline exists because I willed it into being, shaped and guided across generations to produce the perfect vessel for my emergence into this realm." The words hit Evangeline like physical blows, challenging everything she had believed about her heritage and destiny. But through the mate bond, she felt Lysander's unwavering faith in her, his absolute certainty that she was more than just a tool created by ancient darkness. "You're lying," she said, though uncertainty clawed at her heart. "Am I? Look at your hands, child. See how they glow with power in the moonlight? That energy doesn't belong to your world. It's a fragment of mine, passed down through generations of women who thought they were blessed by the light, when they were actually marked by the darkness." Evangeline looked down at her palms, seeing the golden radiance that had always been part of her. And for a moment, doubt crept into her soul. What if everything she thought she knew about herself was wrong? What if the power she had used to heal, to protect, was actually tainted by evil? But then Lysander's hand closed over hers, and through their bond, she felt the truth that transcended words and fear. "It doesn't matter where the power came from," he said, his golden eyes meeting hers with fierce intensity. "What matters is how you choose to use it. You've spent your life healing and protecting others. That choice, that intention, that's what makes you who you are." The entity snarled, its perfect facade cracking to reveal the malevolent force beneath. Pretty words, but ultimately meaningless. "The ritual will proceed as I designed it, and through the daughter of the Red Moon, I will finally claim this realm as my own. Then you'll have to go through me first," Lysander replied, drawing the ancient sword from its sheath. The blade sang as it cut through the air, its runes blazing with silver fire that made the shadow creatures recoil. "A wolf with a sharp stick," the entity sneered, How terrifying. But when Lysander raised the blade, something extraordinary happened. The mate bond between him and Evangeline flared to life, their souls joining across the space that separated them. The golden power in her hands merged with the silver fire of his sword, creating a radiance that transformed the crimson moonlight into something pure and clean. The entity's confidence wavered, genuine surprise flickering across its inhuman features. Impossible. The bond should make you weaker, more vulnerable to my influence. You understand nothing about love, Evangeline said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the very stones of the altar ring in response. You see only tools and weapons, vessels to be used and discarded. But love isn't weakness. It's the force that transforms everything it touches. She stepped toward the altar, her hands blazing with power that no longer felt foreign or frightening. This was her heritage. Not because some ancient entity had shaped it, but because generations of women had chosen to use their gifts for healing and protection. The darkness might have provided the raw material, but love had refined it into something entirely different. The ritual will be completed, she announced, her voice carrying across the mountain amphitheater. But not the way you planned it. The entity roared with fury, its form expanding as shadows poured from every crevice in the surrounding stone. The shadow creatures that had been waiting in the darkness surged forward, their inhuman shrieks echoing off the mountain peaks. But they met not one opponent, but two. Their souls joined and their power magnified by the bond between them. Lysander's sword cut through shadow stuff like it was water, while Evangeline's light dissolved the creatures wherever it touched them. More importantly, as they fought side by side, the ancient altar began to respond to their united presence. The carved runes flared to life, not with the malevolent energy the entity had intended, but with something pure and transformative. Now, Evangeline called to Lysander as they reached the altar's base. The ritual must be completed now, while the blood moon is at its peak. Together, they climbed the stone steps, their hands clasped and their souls singing in harmony. Around them, the battle between their loyal warriors and the shadow creatures raged on. But all that mattered was the circle of carved stone at the altar's summit and the choice they were about to make. "I choose you," Lysander said, as they reached the center of the ancient circle, his voice carrying across dimensions. "Not because of prophecy or destiny, but because of who you are, what you mean to me. I choose you," Evangeline replied, her hands blazing with power as she placed them against his chest. "Not because fate demands it, but because love demands it." The mate bond exploded between them, no longer a gentle connection, but a blazing bridge that joined their souls completely. The power that flowed through that bridge wasn't dark or light alone. It was something entirely new, forged from choice and sacrifice, and the decision to stand together against impossible odds. Above them, the blood moon began to change, its crimson light shifting to silver as the ritual reshaped the very forces it had been designed to channel. The entity's scream of rage and frustration shook the mountain, but it was already too late. The doorway between worlds wasn't opening wider. It was sealing shut, the breach that had allowed shadow creatures into this realm closing like a wound finally allowed to heal. "This isn't over," the entity snarled as its form began to dissolve, pulled back toward whatever dark realm had spawned it. "I will find another way, another vessel." Its words were cut off as the doorway snapped closed with finality, leaving only silence and the silver light of the transformed moon. Around them, the shadow creatures began to dissolve as well, their connection to their master severed, and their hold on the physical realm broken. The warriors who had fought so bravely lowered their weapons, staring in amazement at the transformation that had taken place. But Evangeline only had eyes for Lysander, for the man who had chosen love over duty, trust over fear, hope over despair. In his golden gaze, she saw their future spreading out before them, not perfect or without challenges, but filled with the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. "It's done," she whispered, her hands still glowing with residual power. "No," he replied, pulling her closer as the mate bond settled into its permanent configuration between their souls. "It's just beginning." The ritual was complete, the prophecy fulfilled, and two souls had chosen each other above all else. The blood moon had become a silver blessing, and love had indeed proven to be the strongest magic of all. Chapter 7. The Claiming Bond. Dawn broke over the kingdom of Astereth with a clarity that seemed impossible after the darkness of the previous night. The blood moon had faded into memory, replaced by golden sunlight that painted the castle walls in shades of hope and renewal. But for Evangeline, standing at the window of what were now their shared chambers, the most beautiful sight was the man sleeping peacefully in their bed. Lysander's face in repose showed none of the harsh lines that 13 years of kingship had carved there. In sleep, he looked younger, more like the boy who had lost everything and somehow found the strength to rebuild from ashes. The mate bond between them hummed with contentment, a constant awareness of his presence that felt as natural as breathing. They had returned from the mountain as the sun crested the horizon, exhausted but victorious. The shadow creatures were gone, the breach between worlds sealed, and Mordecai secured in the castle dungeons awaiting trial. But more importantly, they had claimed each other in the most fundamental way possible, their souls joining in a bond that transcended mere physical attraction. Yet the claiming ritual itself remained incomplete. "You're thinking very loudly," Lysander murmured from the bed, his golden eyes opening to find her silhouette against the window. "Come back to bed. The kingdom expects an announcement," she said, though she moved toward him without hesitation. "About us. About what happened last night. About what comes next." He pulled her down beside him, his arms encircling her waist as their bodies pressed together under the silk sheets. The mate bond flared at the contact, sending waves of warmth through both of them that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with spiritual recognition. "The kingdom can wait another hour," he said against her throat, his lips finding the pulse point that made her gasp. "Right now, all that matters is this. You and me, and the fact that we're both still alive." She tilted her head back, giving him better access to the sensitive skin of her neck. "Lysander, there are things we need to discuss. The claiming ceremony, the coronation. What role I'll play as your Luna? You'll play the role of my equal," he interrupted, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had found his missing piece. "My partner in all things, my mate in the truest sense. Everything else is just ceremony and politics." The weight of his words settled over her like a mantle of responsibility and promise. Queen. Luna. The titles carried obligations she was only beginning to understand. But with the mate bond singing between them, she felt capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. "There's something else," she said, her fingers tracing the scar that ran along his jaw. "Something I learned from the ancient texts last night, after we sealed the breach." His attention sharpened, focusing on her completely. "What did you learn?" "The moonborn bloodline carries more than just prophetic abilities. When bonded with a true mate, when the claiming is completed properly, it grants other gifts as well." She paused, gathering courage for what she was about to reveal. The ability to share power through the bond, to strengthen each other in ways that go beyond the physical or emotional. Lysander's eyes widened with understanding and something that might have been hunger. "You're saying that once we're properly mated, I'll be able to access some of your abilities? And I'll be able to access some of yours. Your strength, your alpha command, your connection to the kingdom itself." She met his gaze steadily. "We'll be stronger together than either of us could be alone, but only if the claiming is done according to the old rites." "What do the old rites require?" Evangeline felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "A public ceremony under the full moon, witnessed by the pack and blessed by the ancient powers. The exchange of blood and promises, the marking that signals to all our kind that we belong to each other completely. And then the private consummation, where the bond is sealed in the most intimate way possible." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Where you claim me as yours, and I claim you as mine, witnessed only by the moon and stars." The silence that followed was charged with possibility and desire so intense it was almost tangible. Lysander's hands moved to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the delicate bones of her cheeks as he studied her expression. "Are you asking me to marry you, Evangeline Moonshadow?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm asking you to complete what we started on that mountain," she replied. "To make me your Luna in truth, not just in name. To bind our souls so completely that nothing can ever separate us again." His answer was a kiss that stole her breath and set her blood on fire. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their wolves recognizing the promise inherent in the gesture. "Tonight," he said against her lips, "under the full moon, before the entire kingdom if necessary, I want everyone to know that you're mine, that we chose each other above all else." A knock at the chamber door interrupted the moment, followed by Captain Gareth's respectful voice. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there are matters that require your immediate attention." Lysander sighed, pressing one more kiss to Evangeline's forehead before reluctantly releasing her. "Enter Gareth." The captain stepped into their chambers, his weathered face carefully neutral as he took in their state of undress. Behind him came a servant carrying formal robes and a steaming pot of what smelled like healing tea. "The Council of Lords has requested an emergency session," Gareth reported. "They want to know about last night's events, about the fate of High Counselor Mordecai, and about—" he glanced at Evangeline with something that might have been approval. "About the kingdom's new Luna. They want to assess whether I'm worthy," Evangeline said, understanding the political implications immediately. "They want to understand what's changed," Gareth corrected diplomatically. "The power you displayed last night, the connection between you and His Majesty. It's beyond anything they've encountered before. They need reassurance that these changes serve the kingdom's interests." Lysander's jaw tightened with irritation. "My choice of mate serves the kingdom's interests because it serves mine. Anyone who questions that is welcome to challenge me directly." "No," Evangeline said softly, her hand finding his arm. "They have a right to their concerns. I'm an outsider, someone who appeared without warning and changed everything they thought they knew about their king. Let me meet with them, answer their questions, show them that I'm not a threat to the stability they've worked to build." "You don't need to prove yourself to anyone," Lysander said fiercely. "Yes, I do. Not because I doubt my worth, but because they need to see that I understand the responsibilities that come with being your Luna." She rose from the bed, wrapping a silk robe around herself with unconscious grace. "I want to rule beside you, Lysander, not behind you. That means facing the council as an equal, not hiding behind your protection." The pride that flowed through their bond was so intense it nearly staggered her. "Very well," he said, "but I'll be there with you. And anyone who shows you disrespect will answer to me personally." 2 hours later, they entered the council chamber together, their hands clasped in a gesture that spoke of unity and shared purpose. The assembled lords rose at their entrance, their faces showing varying degrees of curiosity, wariness, and calculation. Lord Blackmore, the eldest of the council, stepped forward to speak for the group. "Your Majesty, we come seeking answers about the events of last night. Reports speak of supernatural battles, of ancient prophecies fulfilled, of powers beyond normal comprehension. The kingdom deserves to know what threats have been faced and overcome." "The threats are ended," Lysander replied simply. "The shadow creatures that have plagued our borders for years were banished back to their own realm. The breach between worlds has been sealed. High Counselor Mordecai, who was revealed as a traitor and murderer, awaits trial for his crimes." "And the woman beside you?" Lord Blackmore's gaze moved to Evangeline with undisguised interest. "What role did she play in these events?" "Lady Evangeline is the daughter of the Red Moon spoken of in ancient prophecy," Lysander said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Without her power, without her courage, the kingdom would have fallen to darkness. She is my mate, my chosen Luna, and anyone who questions her place at my side questions me." A murmur ran through the assembled lords, voices raised in discussion and debate. Finally, Lord Blackmore raised his hand for silence. "Your Majesty, we do not question your judgment in matters of the heart, but the position of Luna carries responsibilities that affect the entire kingdom. What assurance can you give us that Lady Evangeline is prepared for such duties?" Evangeline stepped forward before Lysander could respond, her chin raised in challenge. "I can speak for myself, my lord. What specific concerns do you have about my fitness to serve as Luna?" The directness of her question seemed to catch the council off guard, Several lords exchanged glances before Lord Blackmore spoke again. "You are unknown to us, my lady. Your bloodline, while prophetically significant, is not one that has been tested in matters of statecraft. How do we know that you can provide the stability and wisdom that the kingdom requires?" "You don't," Evangeline replied honestly. "Just as you didn't know 13 years ago whether a traumatized 16-year-old boy could become the strong king who stands before you today. Leadership isn't inherited. It's earned through choices and actions." She moved to stand at the center of the room, her voice carrying clearly to every corner. "I cannot promise that I'll never make mistakes or that every decision I influence will be perfect, but I can promise that I will dedicate my life to serving this kingdom and its people. I can promise that the bond between your king and myself will make both of us stronger, more capable of protecting what matters most." "And what of children?" Lord Blackmore pressed. "The kingdom requires heirs, a stable succession. Can you provide what is needed in that regard?" Heat rose in Evangeline's cheeks, but she answered without flinching. "The mate bond between the king and myself is complete and true. When the time is right, when the kingdom is secure and stable, we will be blessed with children who carry both our bloodlines." The council exchanged meaningful glances, and she could feel their assessment of her changing. This wasn't the frightened village girl who had been dragged to the castle in chains. This was a woman who had faced down ancient evil and emerged victorious. Someone who could stand beside their king as an equal partner. "One final question," Lord Blackmore said. "The power you displayed last night, will it be used in service to this kingdom?" "Every gift I possess belongs to Astereth and its people," Evangeline replied without hesitation. "My abilities exist to protect and heal, to strengthen the bonds that hold our society together. I swear this to you on my life and my sacred bond with your king." The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than tense. Finally, Lord Blackmore smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him. "Then it seems the kingdom has found not just a Luna, but a queen worthy of the throne she will share." He bowed deeply, and one by one the other lords followed suit. "We welcome you to Astereth, your majesty. May your reign be long and prosperous." The formal acceptance by the council cleared the way for the claiming ceremony that evening. As the full moon rose over the castle, the entire court gathered in the ancient amphitheater where werewolf kings had been crowned for generations. Evangeline stood at the center of the stone circle, draped in silver silk that seemed to glow in the moonlight. The crescent birthmark on her shoulder was visible to all, marking her as the prophesied daughter of the Red Moon. But more importantly, the love in her eyes as she gazed at Lysander marked her as a woman who had chosen her path freely. Lysander approached from the opposite side of the circle, magnificent in black leather and silver chainmail that emphasized every powerful line of his body. The ancient sword hung at his side, its runes glowing softly in response to the sacred nature of the ceremony. They met at the center of the circle, their hands clasping as their eyes locked in a gaze that shut out the rest of the world. "Before the moon and stars," Lysander began, his voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. "Before the ancient powers that bind our kind, I claim you as my mate, my Luna, my queen. I offer you my strength, my protection, my love for all the days of our lives." "Before the moon and stars," Evangeline replied, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "Before the ancient powers that bind our kind, I claim you as my mate, my alpha, my king. I offer you my power, my loyalty, my love for all the days of our lives." They drew matching ceremonial daggers, the blades inscribed with runes of binding and fidelity. Small cuts on their palms allowed their blood to mingle, sealing the vows in the most primitive and powerful way their kind knew. The moment their blood touched, power exploded through the mate bond with an intensity that left them both gasping. The assembled court fell silent as silver light enveloped the claiming circle, marking the completion of a bond that would endure beyond death itself. When the light faded, Lysander and Evangeline stood transformed. No longer two separate individuals, but a matched pair, their souls intertwined in ways that went beyond physical or emotional connection. They were Alpha and Luna, king and queen, mates in the truest and most complete sense. The crowd erupted in celebration, cheers and howls of approval echoing across the mountainside. But the newly mated pair had eyes only for each other, their bond singing with completion and promise. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, they would seal the bond in the most intimate way possible. But for now, under the light of the full moon and surrounded by their people, they simply held each other and marveled at the miracle of finding their perfect match in a world full of impossible odds. The prophecy was complete, the kingdom was safe, and two souls had found their destiny in each other's arms. Chapter 8. Forever. After 8 months had passed since the blood moon ritual that changed everything, Evangeline stood in the royal gardens, one hand resting on her rounded belly as she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The child within her stirred at the sound of approaching footsteps, responding to the familiar presence of its father even before birth. "There you are," Lysander said, his arms encircling her from behind as his hands covered hers on their growing child. "Captain Gareth has been looking for you. Something about the final preparations for tomorrow's council meeting. Let him look a little longer," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I want to enjoy this moment of peace before we return to matters of state." The kingdom of Astoreth had flourished in the months following Mordecai's defeat. Trade routes reopened, diplomatic relations strengthened, and the people felt safe for the first time in over a decade. The shadow creatures were gone, the breach between worlds permanently sealed, and their rulers were bound by a love that grew stronger with each passing day. "How are you feeling?" Lysander asked, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her shiver. Heavy, tired, eager to meet this little one who seems determined to kick my ribs into submission. She smiled as the baby responded to his voice with another gentle flutter. But happy, incredibly, completely happy. Through the mate bond, she could feel his contentment matching her own, their souls intertwined in the permanent dance of true partnership. The power they shared flowed between them constantly now, his strength supporting her during the demanding months of pregnancy, while her healing abilities kept him healthy through the stresses of kingship. "Speaking of our child," Lysander said, his hands tracing gentle patterns over her belly, "the court healer confirms what we suspected. The baby will be born with both bloodlines, alpha strength from me, and moonborn abilities from you." Evangeline felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with protective concern, which means our child will be more powerful than either of us were at that age, and more protected. No shadow creatures lurking at the borders, no manipulative relatives whispering poison in young ears. His voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had learned from past tragedies. Our child will grow up knowing love and security, surrounded by people who value both strength and compassion. A gentle breeze stirred the garden air, carrying with it the scent of blooming roses and the distant sound of children playing in the village below. This was the peace they had fought for, the future they had claimed through courage and sacrifice, and the decision to trust in love above all else. "Your Majesty," Captain Gareth's voice carried across the garden, respectful but insistent. "The evening reports require your attention." Lysander sighed, but didn't release his hold on Evangeline. "What news, Gareth?" "Good news, sire. The northern settlements report their first profitable harvest in 5 years. The eastern trade delegations have agreed to our proposed treaties, and the southern lords send word that they're ready to swear renewed oaths of fealty at next month's gathering." "All positive developments," Evangeline observed. "The kingdom truly is healing, thanks to wise leadership and the stability that comes from a strong mated pair on the throne," Gareth replied with genuine warmth. "If I may say so, your majesties, the people have never been happier with their rulers." As if summoned by his words, sounds of celebration drifted up from the village below. Tonight was the monthly festival that honored the moon goddess, a tradition that had taken on new meaning since their mating ceremony. The people celebrated not just the divine feminine, but the living proof that love could triumph over darkness. "We should make an appearance," Lysander said reluctantly. "Let the people see their pregnant Luna. Remind them that the royal line continues strong and true." "In a moment," Evangeline replied, her attention caught by movement at the garden's entrance. A young girl approached, perhaps 7 years old, with dark hair and solemn green eyes that reminded her sharply of her own childhood. Your Majesty, the child said, offering a careful curtsy. Mama sent me to bring you this. She held out a small bouquet of wildflowers, their stems wrapped with a ribbon of silver silk. Evangeline knelt carefully, accepting the gift with the gravity it deserved. What's your name, little one? Lydia, Your Majesty. Mama says you saved our village from the shadow monsters. She says you're a hero. I had help. Evangeline replied gently, glancing up at Lysander with love shining in her eyes. Heroes work better in pairs. The child considered this solemnly, then brightened. Like Mama and Papa? Exactly like Mama and Papa. After the girl skipped away, rejoining her family at the garden's edge, Evangeline allowed Lysander to help her to her feet. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, making her gasp and press both hands to her side. Soon, Lysander said, his voice filled with wonder and anticipation. Very soon we'll hold our child. See the face that will carry both our bloodlines into the future. Are you ready for sleepless nights and endless diaper changes? She teased. I'm ready for anything, as long as you're beside me. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. We've faced ancient prophecies and supernatural enemies. How hard can one small baby be? Evangeline laughed, the sound carrying across the garden and drawing smiles from the servants who tended the evening flowers. You'll regret those words in about 6 weeks. As they made their way toward the castle, joining the stream of people heading to the village celebration, Evangeline caught sight of their reflection in one of the garden's ornamental pools. A king and queen walking hand in hand, her pregnancy obvious beneath the flowing gown, his protective posture speaking of devotion that went beyond duty. They looked like what they were. 2 people who had found their perfect match and built something beautiful together. The scared girl who had been dragged to this castle in chains was gone, replaced by a woman who ruled with wisdom and compassion. The bitter king who had trusted no one was gone too, replaced by a man who had learned that strength came not from isolation, but from connection. Do you ever miss it? Lysander asked, as they paused at the castle's entrance, the sounds of celebration growing louder. The simplicity of your old life? The quiet cottage in the forest? Evangeline considered the question seriously, her gaze sweeping over the kingdom that had become her home, the people who looked to her for guidance and protection. I miss my grandmother sometimes, she said finally. I miss the certainty of that simple life, but I wouldn't trade what we have for anything. This love, this partnership, this future we're building together. It's worth every moment of uncertainty that brought us here, even being captured and dragged here against your will. Especially that, because it led me to you. The baby kicked again, as if agreeing with its mother's words. Soon, very soon, their child would join them in this world of kingdoms and magic, prophecies and politics. But more importantly, their child would be born into a world where love was valued above power, where strength came through connection rather than dominance. Come on, Lysander said, squeezing her hand gently. Let's go celebrate with our people. Let's show them what happiness looks like when 2 souls find their perfect match. As they walked into the warmth and light of the festival, surrounded by people who loved and trusted them, Evangeline felt the future spreading out before them like a golden path. There would be challenges ahead. There always were in the life of rulers, but they would face them together, their bond unbreakable and their love eternal. The prophecy had spoken of a daughter of the red moon and a king without a mate. It had promised that their union would save the kingdom from darkness, but it hadn't mentioned the most important part, that in saving the kingdom, they would also save each other. Behind them, the castle stood strong and proud against the starlit sky. Ahead, their people celebrated life and love and the promise of peace. And within Evangeline's womb, the future stirred and grew, carrying the best of both bloodlines into a world made bright by the power of true love. The end.